Week 6 fantasy football was one of the worst weeks of fantasy football that I can remember, honestly. And Week 7 fantasy football, there's a lot of bye weeks and a lot of injuries coming, guys. So we need to do a lot of changing to our rankings this week, and that's what we're getting into today. We're obviously going to get into the top 30 wide receiver rankings for Week 7 fantasy football, guys. And then at the end of each ranking video, I provide you guys my favorite underdog wide receiver flex option of the week. So make sure to watch till the end, and please make sure to go down there, drop a like on this video, and subscribe to the channel to show your support. It is greatly appreciated, guys. Let's go ahead and just dive right into these rankings right now. So obviously, number one, he's just going to continue to be in a tier by himself. I don't care what happens with Tyreek Hill and this injury that he suffered. He's playing the Philadelphia Eagles, which again is not like the greatest matchup. But Tyreek Hill has literally just like been dominating in his own level. You can see the numbers on the screen. What he is doing is totally ridiculous. You know, he's like a couple hundred yards short from 1,000 yards. And we've only played 6 games. Like, Tyreek Hill is on just an unbelievable pace right now. He's been excellent, 23.3 fantasy points per game, about 10 targets per game. Tyreek Hill is on just an incredible pace, 29 years old, it doesn't matter. Tyreek Hill is seriously one of the freakiest guys I have ever seen on a football field in my entire life. I'm not joking. He is the freakiest human being, possibly an animal. Like, seriously. Our next tier right here, I mean, you've obviously got some studs. Stephon Diggs has been tremendous in fantasy football. He's taken on the New England Patriots in New England, and New England just looks worse and worse and worse by the week. They're looking worse and worse. And Stephon Diggs already has been dominant. You can see the numbers on the screen. Stephon Diggs, not only has he been dominant, but his importance in this offense is it's unbelievably important. It really hasn't changed much in the years, and they're actually starting to not run the ball as much again. They're kind of reverting back to what they always have been, which is a team that relies on Josh Allen and relies on Stephon Diggs. Well, it's great for fantasy football for Stephon Diggs for sure, because you can see Stephon Diggs over 100 yards per game, 19 fantasy points per game, has found the end zone 5 times. Stephon Diggs is ridiculous. And this matchup against the Patriots, it's not like it used to be where Bill Belichick used to shut down your number one option. It doesn't matter anymore. Bill Belichick, the Patriots, they're a terrible team. So I just expect a great week. Cooper Kupp this week versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think Cooper Kupp's going to rip it up. And like, that's not a surprise. That's not a hot take. It's none of that stuff. Cooper Kupp has simply been great since he came back. 20 fantasy points per game in 2 weeks. 10.5 targets per game, 133 yards per game. Cooper Kupp has been outstanding. And we all knew that this was likely going to be the case. But Matt Stafford and him just have possibly some of the best chemistry in the NFL today. They're so in sync every single time. And the Pittsburgh Steelers, unless Cooper Kupp draws Joey Porter Jr., which I don't think he's going to, he's going to go up against like Levi Wallace and a 34-year-old Patrick Peterson. Cooper Kupp is going to dominate the Pittsburgh Steelers this week. Keenan Allen is at number 4 here, and he's taking on the Kansas City Chiefs in Kansas City. So obviously the matchup is not some ideal matchup. Kansas City has done pretty well defensively, but Keenan Allen continues to dominate fantasy football. Obviously, he had the game on Monday night versus the Dallas Cowboys where it wasn't even a great game for him, but he still had like 7 catches for 80 yards and a touchdown. Keenan Allen was spectacular in that Dallas game, and it was a down game for him. I think he has another great game versus the Kansas City Chiefs in Week 7. I think he's going to be great in this game. Listen, Keenan Allen is just super ultra important to this offense, and Justin Herbert had probably one of the worst games of his career on Monday night versus Dallas. I think he comes back and he rebounds in a big way. Number 5, A.J. Brown in what is, I think, the matchup of the week versus the Miami Dolphins. A.J. Brown has been tremendous the past several weeks. And in that game against the Jets, he actually had an opportunity to have like an 80-yard touchdown, just barely overthrown. And actually, he stopped running on his route a little bit. So A.J. Brown literally could have had a 200-yard game and 2 touchdowns. Like, A.J. Brown was that dominant against the New York Jets. Now, obviously, the Jets had both of their defensive backs out. Both of their corners were out. But it doesn't matter. Like, Xavier Howard might miss this game too. And obviously, they have no Jalen Ramsey. A.J. Brown's going to continue to be dominant for this Philadelphia Eagles offense. I see a massive rebound game for the Philadelphia Eagles. I don't know if they're going to win, but I know A.J. Brown's going to be great. Davante Adams at number 6 here. I think he's going to have a really big bounce back week because he's taking on the Chicago Bears in Chicago. Listen, Davante Adams, bad week last week. Obviously, the New England Patriots pretty much shut him down. And I don't even think that you could give the Patriots the credit. Jimmy Garoppolo left that game mid-game and went to the hospital. Now, what I've seen, he dodged a bullet, but they're still not sure if he's going to play. I've actually seen that they're probably not going to play him. So, good chance here that it's going to be either Aiden O'Connell or Brian Hoyer, which obviously is not great, but honestly, what really difference does it make? Like, it doesn't make that much of a difference to me. Regardless of who his quarterback is, Davante Adams is still going to get the target share. And he's playing the Bears defense, and I think that's a great matchup. Number 7, Amon-Ra St. Brown. Man, this week against the Baltimore Ravens, the matchup is not great, but Amon-Ra St. Brown was dominant last week against a really good defense. Tampa Bay's defense has been very good all season, and Amon-Ra St. Brown made him look like child's play. It was like, Amon-Ra St. Brown's that good. And the Detroit Lions are that good. That's the reality here. This is a great team. This is obviously a great player in Amon-Ra St. Brown. He will continue to be their number 1, and he will continue to score fantasy points for you at an excess level. Amon-Ra St. Brown is great. I don't care what the matchup is, and the matchup this week is not particularly awesome. Number 8, I've got Brandon Ayuk here. Brandon Ayuk taking on the Minnesota Vikings. Several reasons for why he's this high. Number 1, Deebo Samuel might miss this game. Deebo Samuel, if he does play, could be pretty limited, and it could be another goose egg game like he gave a couple weeks ago. Brandon Ayuk has been awesome in fantasy football as well. He's averaging over 7 targets per game, 14 fantasy points per game, almost 100 yards per game, and they're taking on the Minnesota Vikings. I think they're going to absolutely trash the Vikings this week. I think they're going to just destroy them. They're coming off a bad loss. I think they're going to be pissed, and they're going to come in and just absolutely bully and just embarrass the Minnesota Vikings on their own field. And Brandon Ayuk, I think, is going to be a large part of that because Deebo Samuel might be out. Well, Christian McCaffrey might be out too. So it's really down. It may be just down to their other 2 weapons, Ayuk and Kittle. I'm taking Ayuk all day in the top 10 right now. Mike Evans at number 9, taking on the Atlanta Falcons in Tampa Bay this week. I like this matchup a lot too. I think Tampa Bay is gonna get right in this game against the Atlanta Falcons. Atlanta's not very good. They're not very good offensively, and they're not very good defensively. Now, obviously, Mike Evans had a little bit of a down week last week. Mike Evans still had over 10 targets. Mike Evans was still heavily involved in this offense. It was a bad game, and they played a very good Detroit Lions team. Mike Evans is gonna be fine. He's going to continue to be important in this offense. And those 10 targets that he got last week, if you put him on there this week, he's getting like 97 to 100 yards. I guarantee Mike Evans is going to be good this week. Good bounce back game from Mike Evans incoming. Number 10, probably feels a little bit high. Jalen Waddle at Philadelphia against the Eagles this week. So obviously, like, Jalen Waddle has not finished that high all season. Jalen Waddle has not been a very good fantasy player. There's a couple reasons for this. Number 1, the most important one, I think, is that the bye weeks are rampant. There's so many teams on bye this week. So we're down to a lot of players right now in fantasy football at every position. So Waddle's there because of that. He's also there because he's finding the end zone again. He's had 2 touchdowns the past 2 weeks, and his target share is improving as well. 7 targets per game. Jalen Waddle is going to be fine. Jalen Waddle in this matchup against the Philadelphia Eagles, where I'm sure they're going to put a lot of attention onto Tyreek Hill. I think Jalen Waddle is going to be fine. The offense is simply too explosive. He's going to hit a big game sooner or later. Number 11, had to drop him a little bit, but I'm still higher on him than a lot of people are. I still have Puka Nacua versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. Puka Nacua, listen, bad week last week. It was not great, and you can see that he's clearly not the wide receiver 1 with Cooper Kupp there. Nobody thought that Cooper Kupp was going to be taking a backseat to Puka Nacua. That was never part of the plan. Puka Nacua was always going to be the second wide receiver on the depth chart as soon as Cooper Kupp came back. Puka Nacua gets a great matchup here. He's going to draw a lot of Levi Wallace or Patrick Peterson, and that's going to be great. I think the Rams are going to throw all over the Pittsburgh Steelers. They're going to be in Los Angeles, coming off a good week against Arizona. They're feeling themselves right now. I got Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp as great options this week. I'm not getting off of Puka Nacua. I think he's going to be a great option. Number 12, Chris Olave this week, taking on the Jacksonville Jaguars on Thursday night. So Chris Olave, it's been kind of a wild ride. You can see like nothing is impressive on the screen. 10.6 fantasy points per game. He's only got 1 touchdown so far. Nothing has been impressive. And honestly, Derek Carr has been a little bit hard to watch. It's not great, but Chris Olave did have a pretty good week last week, considering all things involved. They obviously lost that game to the Texans, and I think they're going to lose again on Thursday night to the Jaguars. But I think Chris Olave, his importance is solidified. He's clearly the wide receiver 1. He's clearly the best playmaker out of the wide receivers of that group. I think Derek Carr and Chris Olave, they have relatively been disappointing to me. But I think Chris Olave this week, with all the bye weeks and all the injuries, he's got to be inside my top 12. Jordan Addison at number 13. Obviously taking on the 49ers, that is not a good matchup. And honestly, I consider dropping Jordan Addison pretty low this week because I was disappointed with what happened last week. He only got 5 targets, and the touchdown that he scored saved his week. But I still do think Jordan Addison is going to be bound for some good weeks. And simply, he's too important to this offense right now to not be inside of the top 15. Now, obviously, KJ Osborne, he had a pretty good week last week. I don't think it's going to be a good week for any Minnesota Viking. I mean, they're playing, like I said, I think the 49ers are going to absolutely embarrass the Vikings on their home field. And I think Jordan Addison, as a result of, I think Kirk Cousins just gets pressured nonstop. It's probably going to be a bad game, but I still don't advise a lot of people sitting Jordan Addison because I do know that Jordan Addison's a big play threat. I mean, he's got 4 touchdowns through 6 weeks. So Jordan Addison, in most cases, will be in my lineups this week. DJ Moore at number 14 for the Chicago Bears, taking on the Las Vegas Raiders. And honestly, this one is concerning as well because Justin Fields has already basically been ruled out for this game. I think he's considered doubtful. He's got the thumb injury. It's going to be really hard to predict, honestly, because like even with Justin Fields, DJ Moore's had bad games. I think he'll probably be worse off without Justin Fields, but who knows what they're going to get at the quarterback position this week. And who knows what DJ Moore is going to get. Obviously, DJ Moore was not that great last week. This is just the story of DJ Moore. He's on a hot and cold team, a hot and cold offense that can't find consistency. That's the ultimate problem here, but I still do like the big playability of DJ Moore, and the matchup is actually really good. Number 15, Amari Cooper this week, taking on the Indianapolis Colts in Indianapolis. Amari Cooper just is one of the hardest players to project sometimes because a lot of times I think he's going to have great weeks with Deshaun Watson, and it doesn't happen. And then a lot of times, like last week, I was like, I'm not starting Amari Cooper over most guys. And he comes out and he has several big plays in the game against the 49ers, no less. It's hard to predict. It really, really is. And honestly, I think Amari Cooper is just a guy that you can't really put on your bench most weeks because you saw what he's capable of without Deshaun Watson last week. Against the Indianapolis Colts, a defense that I like, but Amari Cooper to me, like, it's hard to sit him, and it's hard to tell my audience to sit this kind of guy when he's popping off for big games, almost 100-yard games, even without Deshaun Watson. Christian Kirk at number 16 on that Thursday night game, obviously. So Christian Kirk to me, it's completely dependent on what happens with Trevor Lawrence. If Trevor Lawrence goes, and I have no indication whether one way or the other he's going, I kind of have had the sense through reading reports he's going to play because while he did leave that game with that knee injury, the reports that I read is that it wasn't a serious knee injury and that he's probably not going to miss, but it is a Thursday night game, so I don't know. This ranking is entirely dependent because Trevor Lawrence and Christian Kirk have really good chemistry, and honestly, Christian Kirk is not good enough of a player to be good with another backup quarterback, in my opinion. So Christian Kirk is here if Trevor Lawrence plays. If he doesn't play, he's going to fall significantly down the rankings. Number 17, Devonta Smith taking on the Miami Dolphins. Listen, it's been bad. The past several weeks have been bad with Devonta Smith. I keep telling my audience to keep playing him, and I do continue to hold that belief, but I do acknowledge, like, I understand it's been hard. And I don't have a ton of Devonta Smith in redraft leagues, so I get it. Like, it's been really, really hard to keep starting him. I'm going to continue to do it. Unfortunately, I will. The Miami Dolphins matchup is a good one. It is a good wide receiver matchup here. It's been bad. I think A.J. Brown's going to continue to do well. But I think Devonta Smith is still a guy that you have to start, especially with all the bye weeks that are coming up and all the injuries that are happening. Number 18 and 19, Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf back-to-back versus the Arizona Cardinals. This is what I keep saying every single week. They're the hardest two wide receivers to rank week to week. They really, really are. I don't know which way to lean. This week, I feel pretty good about leaning Lockett because DK Metcalf, he was irritated last game. I watched that full game against the Cincinnati Bengals. He was really irritated with Geno Smith, and he committed a dumb penalty. Like, DK Metcalf kind of looked like he was in his own head last week. And I don't know how much that translates to the next week, but I do know that the matchup is good. Arizona, as tough as they have been early in the season, we're going to start to see Arizona really start to slow down because there's just not much hope on this roster. There really isn't. They're not that talented. And so I think that Seattle's going to take advantage and dominate the Arizona Cardinals this week. I like Tyler Lockett personally better. I think he's just a better fantasy player in general. He's averaging more targets per game than DK Metcalf, and I think he's not quite as much of a head case, for lack of a better word, as DK Metcalf. While DK is obviously still very capable of hitting a big play at any point in the game, DK Metcalf is just simply too inconsistent for me to have over Tyler Lockett this week. Number 20, Christian Watson. I really wanted to put Christian Watson higher this week. He's taking on the Denver Broncos. I think Christian Watson is going to be a very good week. The only reason that he's not ranked higher is because there's just no consistency with Green Bay. Obviously, Jordan Love has looked awful the past several weeks. It's hard to have confidence in a Jordan Love-led offense with the performances we've seen. But I am encouraged by the fact that Christian Watson, his target share is going up, and he's a big play threat, and they're playing the Denver Broncos. They're way bigger of a mess than the Packers are. And I think the Packers are actually a little bit of a mess right now. But Denver is possibly the cure for this type of mess. Because I think Green Bay is ultimately a more stable organization, a more stable team with better offensive playmakers. I think Christian Watson has the possibility of having a 2-touchdown game. I just am not confident in it, and I'm not sure about it just because Jordan Love has not been good, and Christian Watson, largely, his workload is going to be very, very inconsistent and hard to predict. Number 21, Deebo Samuel. Like I said, entirely dependent on if he plays. I've seen that he's day-to-day. I saw that he's day-to-day on Monday, and I don't know what to think, but I do know that I think San Francisco will dominate the Minnesota Vikings. Like I said, if Deebo plays, I honestly would not be surprised if he's on a snap count of some kind. So I can't rank him very high, but I do think that San Francisco is going to be so dominant against the Minnesota Vikings that I can't rank him outside of my top 25. Number 22, I tell you what, Jacoby Myers, I wanted to put him so much higher than this. Jacoby Myers has been excellent in fantasy football. Do not take this as a slight. Honestly, I really can't express enough how confident I am in starting Jacoby Myers this week. Because obviously, the matchup here for Las Vegas is really, really good. They're taking on the Bears, like I said earlier with Davante Adams. But the problem here is that Jacoby Myers has been really good with Jimmy Garoppolo. Him and Jimmy G have a lot of chemistry together. They work really well together. And I think that, honestly, the ultimate reality is that Jimmy Garoppolo is just good with the shorter targets, and Jacoby Myers is that type of guy. Davante Adams he's better at the deep ball. Davante Adams can do it all, and that's why he's good with any quarterback. But Jacoby Myers specifically takes control of the out routes, the shorter routes. That's Jacoby Myers' game. If Jimmy Garoppolo is not there, I have issues with this. If he's there, I'm playing Jacoby Myers, and I employ my audience to play Jacoby Myers. Just keep track of this situation this week, because if Jimmy G doesn't play, I'm not as confident in Jacoby Myers, and that's the reason he's down this low. Number 23, Zay Flowers this week, taking on the Detroit Lions. The matchup is not great, but I actually predicted this last week. I predicted a Zay Flowers touchdown on Sunday versus the Tennessee Titans, and it happened. So I feel pretty good about that, but also just because of the fact that he's so clearly their main weapon. Mark Andrews obviously is the main target, but Zay Flowers is the best weapon on the offense. It's not close. Their wide receivers, Odell, Rashad Bateman. Yeah, Odell had a decent week last week, but that's not going to keep up. He's not consistent. The only consistent wide receiver in this offense is Zay Flowers. So while I don't think the ceiling is super high this week against a better defense, against a better team versus the Detroit Lions, I do think that Zay Flowers is just going to continue to be involved. And I think that his fantasy relevance is just going to be very steady throughout the whole season. Not super high ceiling week to week. And I think this is one of those type of weeks that his ceiling just isn't that high. Number 24, I've got Michael Pittman versus the Cleveland Browns. Michael Pittman had a very good week last week. And honestly, I didn't think he would. I was telling my audience, I don't think it's going to be a great week at all. I was wrong about that. He had over 100 yards, and he worked really well with Gardner Minshew. The problem with that is, number one, a lot of garbage time. They got killed by the Jacksonville Jaguars. And number two, the problem heading into this week is the matchup is a lot tougher, I think. Cleveland's defense is outstanding. They're an outstanding defense. Not only is their pass rush great, it also, their pass rush obviously helps out their secondary because they get a lot of just pressure early, but there is also a ton of coverage sacks, meaning that the secondary is clamping down on the wide receivers. I think there's a chance that it happens. I think there's a chance that Michael Pittman has a pretty bad game, but just from a target consistency standpoint, just from an importance to the offense standpoint, Michael Pittman does need to be inside my top 24. Number 25, Calvin Ridley continues to be one of the most hot and cold players in fantasy football. They're obviously playing on Thursday night. And again, if Trevor Lawrence doesn't play, Calvin Ridley, he'll drop. But I just don't know what to do with him right now. Calvin Ridley, his importance to the offense totally fluctuates week to week. Now, obviously, last week's a little bit hard to judge because, as I just said, they blew out the Indianapolis Colts. It's hard to judge Calvin Ridley week to week. I think in this type of matchup on Thursday night, if Trevor Lawrence plays, he'll be relevant. But here's my ultimate problem with this. I think Marshawn Lattimore is going to do a very good job against Calvin Ridley. He knows Calvin Ridley. Calvin Ridley's years with Atlanta, Marshawn Lattimore knows Calvin Ridley's game. So I don't think that Calvin Ridley, even if Lawrence plays, is going to have a good week. And that's why Christian Kirk is ranked much higher than Calvin Ridley this week. Calvin Ridley's a struggle. Obviously, big play guy, but the matchup this week is not good. Marquise Brown at number 26, and this is ultimately the problem. I've been discussing Marquise Brown over the past several weeks, and I get a lot of flack for my ranking on Marquise Brown every single week. And I get it. Like, when you look at the numbers on the screen, you can see that he's been important. Almost 9 targets per game. He's got 3 touchdowns, 11.5 fantasy points per game. I'm not debating his importance to the offense, especially with James Conner out. What I will always say about this is that, like I said last week, there's something to bad teams, especially at this time of the year. You've got the Cardinals at 1-5 now. And to their credit, they were much more competitive for the first several games. Last week, they got killed. The other week, they got killed. This team is starting to lose morale. And it's natural because they're just not very talented. And so they're clearly in the Caleb Williams sweepstakes, in the Drake May sweepstakes. I think that this team is starting to lose confidence, and I think they're starting to lose effort as a result. I think Seattle's going to crush the Arizona Cardinals this week. Just from an offensive importance standpoint, Marquise Brown's in here, but I don't think it's going to be very good. Number 27, Terry McLaurin taking on the Giants. Terry McLaurin is not someone I'm wild about any single week. Very inconsistent. Every time, every week it fluctuates. But the matchup is excellent. And he has been pretty good at fantasy football in the past several weeks. As good as you can be on the Washington Commanders. That's the ultimate problem. Is he's a Washington Commander, and his quarterback is Sam Howell. Sam Howell has played above a lot of people's expectations, but he's still not that good. Terry McLaurin is on here because of matchup, and he is a big play threat, and he's their best wide receiver. Number 28, Courtland Sutton versus the Green Bay Packers. Listen, there's no question at this point that Courtland Sutton is not only the wide receiver 1 in the eyes of Sean Payton, in the eyes of Russell Wilson, but he's better than Jerry Jeudy. He really is. Jerry Jeudy, I think, will be better with a change of scenery, but there's no question. Jerry Jeudy is not good right now. That's just the reality. Courtland Sutton has found the end zone too. Courtland Sutton has been relatively decent in fantasy football this season. 4 touchdowns through the first 6 games. But Courtland Sutton, the target share is not consistent enough, and the matchup is not great versus Jair Alexander, who I do believe is going to play this week. Courtland Sutton, The Denver Broncos are just bad. 29 is Drake London against Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Drake London had one of his best games as a pro last week. I'm not going to make too much of it. Drake London was playing the Washington Commanders. Their defense is not good. Their secondary is not good. Drake London against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this week. The upside is never that high because of the offense he's on, and I think Tampa Bay is going to absolutely shut down the Atlanta Falcons this week. Chris Godwin in the same matchup rounds out the top 30. Chris Godwin, I think, just simply has to be here as a result of all the bye weeks. His ceiling still isn't that high, but he did get a lot of work last week, and that was a good sign. That was definitely a good sign for future weeks to come for Chris Godwin because he was important to the team, and he was pretty efficient with his work, but he's just not that high of an upside player. And as promised, my underdog flex wide receiver of the week, I can't even tell you how much I wanted to put him on this list. I've got Jackson Smith-Njigba versus the Arizona Cardinals. For those of you who have been with me since the offseason, you already know how much I love Jackson Smith-Njigba. I shouted from the rooftops all offseason that he was going to be a breakout, league-winning type of player. I predicted that he'd be better than DK and Tyler Lockett early on. Obviously, I was wrong about that. But I also said, if that doesn't happen, he'll get it going after the bye week. And I can tell you from studying Jackson Smith-Njigba very closely over this time playing this season, they have used him so much. It's so frustrating. They've used him on so many quick routes, quick out routes that are 2 yards deep, quick wide receiver screens that are underneath. Jackson Smith-Njigba had barely been targeted down the field until last week versus the Cincinnati Bengals. He had more downfield targets and more downfield routes than he had in any other week, almost combined. Jackson Smith-Njigba, that's the missing piece right there. If he gets more downfield routes, which I believe he will, versus the Arizona Cardinals, Jackson Smith-Njigba's breaking out. I am calling for the Jackson Smith-Njigba breakout this week. I wanted to put him in my top 30 so bad, but he's perfect for my underdog flex wide receiver option of the week. So let me know what you think of these rankings in the comments below and what questions you need answered before week 7 fantasy football. And if you want to see the top buy low trade targets before week 7 fantasy football, click on this video right here.